In the shadowed dusk of Wyoming's barren plains, a haunting cry pierced the cold air. Urgent, desperate, trembling with fear. "Please, open it. I can't breathe," a voice begged, trembling on the edge of life itself. The lonely rancher, Wyatt Reed, had come to expect silence and solitude. But that cry shattered his quiet world. When he lifted that weathered burlap sack, his breath caught, frozen by a sight that would haunt him forever. Wyoming, late 1870s. The sky above was a bruised canvas, streaked with the last blood-red hues of sunset bleeding into shadow. The wind shrieked across the open plains, whistling past the weather-beaten ranch house, its timbers groaning like an ancient ghost. Wyatt pulled his coat tighter, battling the gusts that seemed to carry whispers of ghosts long gone. His boots stirred up dust as he stepped toward the barn, every step slow and deliberate, used to the loneliness, yet unprepared for what awaited him. The leather of his gloves creaked softly as he gripped his lantern, its flickering flame casting trembling shadows on the dirt path. This land had been his cradle, his grave, and his prison. He'd built the barn with his father, buried his wife beneath its shadow when the pox claimed her, then buried his young daughter just weeks later. Since that day, only the wind and dust kept him company, until tonight. Wyatt checked the stall. Everything appeared intact, yet an ominous feeling prickled at his spine. He turned to leave but froze solid, an unnatural stillness in the wind, and then a whisper. A voice, faint and strained, begged through the darkness, "Please, open it. I cannot breathe." His heart hammered as he spun toward the old storage shed, a place he hadn't dared open in months. Its warped doors sagged like they might collapse at any moment, leaning against the weight of years. With steady resolve, Wyatt raised his lantern and stepped closer, the beam slicing through the gloom. "Someone, please." The voice gasped again, muffled and desperate. The wind howled louder, trying to swallow the plea whole, but Wyatt had heard enough. His hand moved instinctively, reaching for the cold steel of his revolver. Slowly, he pushed open the crooked shed door. The smell hit him like a punch. Damp dust, sweat, and something sharp, metallic, terrifyingly familiar. Blood, perhaps, or the scent of raw fear. The lantern's glow spilled across shelves cluttered with rusted tools, coils of frayed rope, and a pile of grain sacks. And then he saw movement. Near the sacks, a shape twitched, jerked, then stilled. Wyatt stepped forward, cautious as a predator stalking prey, every footfall silent on the dirt floor. It wasn't just a sack. It was a person, tied tight with rough rope, burlap pressed against trembling flesh. The voice came again, hoarse and pleading. "Please, I cannot breathe." Wyatt set his lantern down gently, knelt, and began working to untie the knots that held her prisoner. Whoever had done this intended to hide her away, to silence her forever. As the sack peeled open, the stench of raw fear and violence grew overwhelming. A young woman's face emerged, barely 20, bruised and battered, lips cracked from dehydration, her eyes wide with terror. In the cold shadows of the frontier night, a faint gasp cut through the silence, a trembling breath, muffled behind a rag that choked her voice. Her body was battered, frail as a reed, trembling under the weight of unseen horrors. Slowly, Wyatt reached out with cautious hands, peeling the cloth from her mouth, and she coughed violently, air scraping her throat like coarse sandpaper. Her eyes fluttered open, wide, haunted, an icy blue that seemed to hold the darkness itself. They fixed on his, desperate and pleading. "Please, she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. Don't let them take me again. Wyatt's chest clenched tight. Gently, he peeled away the sack that covered her head, revealing tangled blonde hair matted with blood and sweat, clinging to her cheeks like remnants of a nightmare. Rope burns marked her wrists, scratches carved across her arms, evidence of a struggle she barely survived. She blinked against the blinding light, her breath shallow and quick. I am not here to hurt you, Wyatt said softly, voice steady but gentle. She winced, trying to push herself upright, but he was quick to stop her. No sudden moves. You're safe now. You're at a ranch. My ranch. Her trembling breath hitched, tears spilling down her dirt-streaked face. They left me here to die, she whispered, voice cracked with despair. Wyatt peeled off his coat and draped it around her trembling shoulders, a makeshift shield against the cold. I don't know who did this, he murmured, voice low and fierce, but I swear I'll find out. As he lifted her into his arms, she let out a soft, pained cry. Not of resistance, but of raw hurt. Clutching his shirt as if it was the only thing anchoring her to life itself. Wyatt cast a quick glance into the encroaching darkness outside, then slammed the door shut behind him, the wind howling like a vengeful spirit. Inside the ranch, something had shifted. The storm outside was fierce, but inside, a quiet resolve had taken root. He laid her down carefully on a cot near the flickering fireplace, mindful not to jostle her injuries. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and aged leather, warm and familiar amid the chaos. Swiftly, he moved with practiced ease. Clean cloth, basin of water, a splash of whiskey that was nearly gone. Lydia shivered, curling inward, eyes vacant and unfocused. Dirt smudged across her cheeks, her wrists raw and bleeding, cracked lips trembling. You need to stay awake, he said softly, voice steady despite the tension. At least until I stop the bleeding. Her eyes fluttered, barely a nod. Wyatt cleaned her wounds with quiet precision, each motion deliberate, almost reverent. The whiskey made her gasp, a sharp intake of breath, but she didn't pull away. She clenched her teeth and endured, her body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Wyatt worked in silence, hands hardened by hardship, shaped by too many losses, too few saves. When he finished, he grabbed an old quilt from the cedar chest and gently draped it over her. Then he moved to the stove, filling a kettle, the sound of water boiling breaking the tense quiet. Minutes later, he returned with a warm cloth, pressing it softly to her face. She flinched, but he gently pulled back. You're safe here, he repeated firmly. Understand? Her face crumpled in a way that cut deeper than tears, a silent shame that haunted her eyes. Wyatt sat by the dying embers of the fire, shadows flickering across his hardened features. His jaw clenched tight as if holding back more than just words. Then, softly, he asked, We leaving you here? Her voice was fragile, barely more than a whisper. They got spooked, she murmured, eyes darting nervously. Thought someone was tailing us. One of them hit me when I cried too loud. Next thing I knew, I was dragged into that sack, choking on darkness. Wyatt didn't speak, only stared into the flames, waiting. She pressed on, her voice rough with exhaustion. I ain't lying. She looked at him, bruised, bloodshot eyes meeting his steady gaze. I swear. He studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. I know. A breath of quiet relief escaped her, barely perceptible. You'll stay here tonight, Wyatt said, voice low but firm. And after that, we'll see. She nodded, eyelids fluttering, surrendering to sleep. Wyatt turned away, then hesitated at the closet. He reached in and withdrew two objects, an old wool coat, dark green with faded, tarnished buttons, once his wife's, and a small ceramic jug wrapped snugly in cloth. Back at her cot, he gently lifted the blankets, placing the jug at her feet. "Just warm water," he murmured softly. "Keeps the cold out." He draped the coat across her shoulders, the scent of lavender and cedar faint but lingering. His fingers brushed the collar, lingering a heartbeat longer than necessary. Lydia, half asleep, fluttered her eyelids, catching the change in his expression. Not just stern silence, but something deeper. An ache, a hollow sadness, as if that coat pulled from him a piece of his soul. He held it there, silent, before finally letting go. Wyatt settled into a chair beside her cot, elbows on his knees, eyes distant. "You don't have to stay," she whispered, voice trembling. "Yes," he replied softly. "I do." The night stretched long and quiet. Wyatt watched the flickering fire, listened to her breath steady into sleep. He adjusted the kettle when it hissed too loud, smoothed the blanket when she stirred. Once, she mumbled something, maybe a name, maybe a prayer. Wyatt didn't ask. He simply sat there, hands clasped over his lap, guarding the fragile peace. Dawn broke slowly, the wind easing into a gentle breeze. Sunlight seeped through the cracks, casting a pale glow over the wooden floorboards. Lydia slept deeply now, her hands curled within the sleeves of that borrowed coat, a shield for someone else. Wyatt Reed, a man who'd buried more pain than most could imagine, sat silently in that sturdy chair, daring the past to come knocking again. Outside, the Wyoming hills awoke beneath a golden haze, the dry pasture stretching endlessly. Wyatt stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. At first, everything appeared unchanged, silent, still, eerily so. But then, he saw it, fresh hoof prints, deep and deliberate, not from his horses. These were larger, more recent. They curved around the barn's side, where the earth was churned into a muddy mess. His breath caught as he moved closer, following the trail past the feed troughs. Something sharp and dark caught Wyatt's eye, etched into the charred bark of the tallest tree like a scar from a nightmare. It was a crude symbol, a single letter burned deep into the wood, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. He'd seen that mark before, on dusty bounty posters and whispered rumors in town. It belonged to the Redmouth Riders, a ruthless gang notorious for smuggling women across the wild territories, leaving behind their branding like a signature of terror. Organized, savage, and always one step ahead of the law, they marked what they claimed. And Wyatt knew that symbol meant trouble was closing in. Lydia Wyatt turned on her heel, boots kicking up a cloud of dust as she hurried back toward the cabin. Inside, she sat on the cot, wrapped in her green coat, eyes clearer but shadowed with dark circles from nights of fear. Wyatt strode in silently, clutching a flickering lantern, his face grim. "Put your shoes on," he ordered softly. She blinked, confusion flickering across her face. "What?" "We don't have time." Without waiting for a reply, she obeyed, stumbling to her feet as he handed her a shawl. Her eyes widened with dread. "What is it?" she asked, voice trembling. They'd been here last night, around the barn, left her a message. The realization hit her like a punch. They know. Wyatt said nothing, only handed her the shawl and gestured for her to follow him. They moved through the yard in tense silence, her slight limp barely slowing her. Wyatt led her behind the main house toward the old hay shed, where dust hung thick in the air. With a creak, he pulled open the weathered doors. Inside, the scent of dry timber and oil filled his nostrils. At the back, behind a stack of crates, was a trap door, an old secret long forgotten. Wyatt knelt, wrenching it open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. "What is this?" Lydia whispered, her voice barely carrying. "Storm cellar," Wyatt replied softly. "My family built it when the war drew near. Supplies, a hiding place when things got bad." He lit the lantern, the flickering flame casting long shadows on the walls. "You're staying down here, at least until I figure our next move." She hesitated, eyes darting with defiance. "I've been locked away enough." Wyatt's voice was low and steady. "This isn't prison. It's a shield." His gaze hardened. "They're coming for you. You said so yourself." She swallowed hard, nodding in silent acceptance. Carefully, she climbed down the stairs, each step a quiet act of defiance. The cellar was cramped but dry, lined with shelves of canned supplies and an old cot in the corner. Wyatt followed, setting the lantern on a crate, then checked the door again, listening to the silence. He stood there for a long moment, like a man weighing the weight of every decision, every risk. "I've escaped before," Lydia said softly, breaking the quiet. "Twice." Wyatt turned, eyes narrowing. "First time I broke a bottle and ran. Got 2 miles before they caught me. They beat me so badly I couldn't walk for days." Her voice cracked, trembling. "Second time I hid in a supply wagon, made it to a stagecoach stop until one of them found me again." Her eyes filled with tears. "And if you don't scream, I'll hear it. I swear I will." For the first time, a flicker of something close to a smile nearly tugged at her lips. But she kept her voice steady. Wyatt reached into his coat pocket, fingers closing around a small tin of dried jerky, then carefully set it on the shelf beside her, as if offering a lifeline. "I'll check on you every hour," he promised, locking the trap door from the outside. But his eyes told a different story. He wouldn't stray far. With a slow turn, he climbed the creaking steps, then pulled the hatch shut above her, sealing her in. Outside, the wind had picked up again, fierce and dry, howling through the tall grass, whispering secrets of the wild plains. Wyatt hammered the doors shut, then leaned against the rough wood frame, gazing out over the land that now felt like his battlefield. This wasn't chance. No, this was war. Plain and brutal. As late afternoon fell, the wind finally settled, leaving a heavy silence. The sun dipped low, spilling blood-red light across the cracked fence posts, casting shadows that stretched like dark fingers across the parched earth. Wyatt was patching the broken hinge on the corral gate when a cloud of dust rose on the southern road. Slow, deliberate, like the approach of something deadly. 3 riders, coming with purpose. They didn't ride like travelers passing through. They carried the weight of knowing exactly where they were headed. Wyatt straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, watching them approach. Their boots sank heavy into the dirt, and beneath wide-brimmed hats, their eyes hid secrets. The man in the middle lifted a hand in what looked like mock friendliness. "Even, friend." Wyatt didn't answer. They stopped just shy of the porch, shadows stretching long behind them. "We're looking for someone," the middle man drawled, voice gravelly. "A young woman, brown hair, might have come this way. She don't say much." Another rider, grinning darkly, added, "But she's kin. Her family owes us." Wyatt's voice was cold steel. You her kin? The older rider spat on the ground, voice rough. Blood? Bond? Doesn't matter. Wyatt took a step forward, steady and unflinching. Kin don't stuff a girl in a sack and beat her half to death. The middleman's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering. You making assumptions, mister? Wyatt's gaze hardened. I saw the bruises, heard her cry for air. If she's family, I'd hate to see what your enemies look like. The youngest rider shifted uneasily, his hand brushing the gun at his belt. You better watch your step, the old man growled. That girl belongs to us. Wyatt's hand hovered on the rifle's butt, voice calm but firm. No, she doesn't. A tense beat passed. The middleman nudged his horse forward, tension thick in the air. The youngest tensed, muscles coiled. Then, a whisper of steel. A gun, drawn in a flash. Last chance, rancher, the boy snapped. Hand her over. Wyatt moved faster than thought, raising the rifle. One shot cracked through the stillness, shattering the silence like a thunderclap. Dust erupted near the horse's hooves as one reared wildly, nearly throwing its rider. The three men jerked back, caught off guard. Wyatt didn't flinch. They'll be back. I can feel it in my bones. Wyatt carefully set down a small lock and latch, something sturdier than any bolt could ever be. It's a thin line between safety and chaos out here, and he knew this would hold better even if the night fell dark and silent. She stared at it, her brow furrowed, doubt flickering in her eyes. You really think they'd come at night? She asked, voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. Wyatt didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached deep into his coat and pulled out a small blade, cold and sharp as a razor's edge. He placed it beside her cot, then folded a note and set it next to the knife. Her brow creased further. What's that? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. If I don't come back, he said softly. Take the knife, head northwest, about 6 miles to the old ranger station. No one's used it in years, but it's got a well and supplies. Lydia's hands trembled uncontrollably, her breath hitching. Why are you risking everything? You don't even know me. Wyatt held her gaze, steady and unwavering. Because I know you want to live, he replied. Then he stood, pushed open the door, and locked the hatch behind him. He reinforced the shed door with iron beams, each clang echoing in the tense silence. Every creak of wind made his pulse jump, but his hands stayed calm, resolute. Inside, Lydia unfolded the note, her trembling fingers reading Wyatt's rough handwriting. You don't owe anyone your silence. Not anymore. She folded it carefully, tucked it beneath her pillow, then lay back down. One hand rested on the knife, not out of fear, but readiness. Above, the moon climbed high, sharp and cold, casting long shadows across the land. Outside, Wyatt sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. The storm hit like a freight train, sudden and savage. By twilight, the sky above the plains had turned a furious black, swirling with rage. Thunder roared like 1,000 gunshots echoing across the hills. Wind tore through the ranch house, rattling every window, every board, as if trying to tear it apart. Wyatt was still outside, patching loose planks along the northern fence line. He told Lydia to stay hidden, to bolt the trap door and not to come out until he returned. But storms, like shadows, have a way of breaking even the best laid plans. Down in the cellar, Lydia sat curled under a rough blanket, clutching Wyatt's note like a talisman. Rain hammered the roof, pounding like fists, desperate to break in. The lantern beside her flickered and dimmed, its flame dying slow. Her throat ached with thirst, dry and raw. She hesitated, then crept up the narrow stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The kitchen was cold, dark, empty. Wind howled down the chimney, rattling pots and pans. She moved swiftly to the counter where Wyatt had left a jug and a cup. As she lifted the cup to her lips, a deafening crash shattered the window on the east wall, glass exploding inward like shrapnel. Shards sliced across the wooden floor, glittering like tiny blades. Lydia froze, the cup slipping from her trembling hands. Then footsteps, heavy, deliberate, pounded inside the house. A shadow slipped through the parlor, silent as a wolf on the prowl. He was back again, swinging with deadly intent, the shadow of menace stretching across the dimly lit room. She darted to the side, her blade flashing in the flickering lantern light, slicing the air just inches from his face. But he was quick, grabbing her wrist with iron grip, slamming her against the cold stone wall with a force that rattled her bones. "Dup, girl," he growled through clenched teeth, eyes blazing with contempt. "You really think this ends with you walking out of here alive?" His fist rose like a thunderclap, ready to deliver the final blow. Suddenly, the world exploded in a burst of lightning that illuminated the entire cabin, casting jagged shadows. The front door was ripped open with a violent crash, splinters flying as Wyatt stormed inside, rain pouring down his soaked coat, rifle leveled and steady as a mountain. Without hesitation, he squeezed the trigger. The crack of the shot echoed like a gunshot in the canyon. The bullet struck the intruder in the shoulder, spinning him into the hearth with a sickening thud. The man groaned, clutching his wounded side as if the pain might swallow him whole. Wyatt advanced, calm and deadly, the rifle still trained on him. "Move again." Wyatt's voice was low, gravelly, warning like the rumble before a storm, "and you'll leave in a box." The man froze in place, eyes wide with fear. Wyatt turned his gaze to Lydia, who was trembling, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Can you walk?" he asked, voice rough but gentle. She nodded, weak but determined, and Wyatt helped her to her feet, her weight leaning heavily against him as she winced with every step. In the quiet of the bedroom, he eased her down onto the bed, careful not to jostle her too much. Her clothes were torn, her lip bleeding, her ankles swollen like a storm cloud ready to burst. "Let me see," Wyatt said softly. He knelt beside her, brushing her damp hair from her face, his hands steady despite the chaos. "You did good. Held your own," he murmured. Her voice trembled like a fragile leaf in a gale. "I thought I was going to die." Wyatt's jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady, reassuring. "You didn't," he said quietly. "You're safe now." From the dresser he reached for a battered tin box, grabbing rags and whiskey. He cleaned her cuts with careful precision, then turned to her swollen ankle. He needed something stronger than cloth, something that could staunch the bleeding. At the foot of the bed sat a weathered cedar chest, its paint peeling like old bark. Wyatt hesitated before opening it slowly, creaking hinges announcing the secrets within. Inside, faded clothes lay folded with quiet dignity, memories pressed into every stitch. He pulled out a soft, well-worn blue flannel shirt, familiar and comforting. His hand paused over it, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. Lydia watched him, eyes searching. "Yours," she said softly. Wyatt shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Clara's my wife," he murmured, turning the cuff of the shirt to reveal her name, stitched in delicate thread. Clara always sewed her name into everything. Clothes, handkerchiefs, dreams. Said I'd lose my head if it wasn't attached. A faint smile touched Wyatt's face, tinged with sadness. Then, with gentle care, he tore the sleeve free, wrapping it snugly around Lydia's ankle, firm but tender. They rode out at dawn, the horizon bleeding with the first light. But the trail ahead was a jagged scar across the land, broken, twisted, and unforgiving. The dirt beneath their horses' hooves was cracked and dry, winding through silent creek beds and over ragged ridges that seemed to scrape the sky. Lydia hunched low over her saddle, her grip tight as iron, her eyes scanning the endless wasteland. Wyatt led the charge, his rifle strapped across his back, every nerve stretched taut beneath a sun that burned like a forge overhead. No sign of travelers, no distant wagon wheels. Only the haunting cawing of crows circling high above, their wings slicing through the air like dark omens. As midday struck with relentless heat, they paused beneath a towering sandstone bluff, seeking shade for their exhausted horses. Wyatt studied the battered map, sweat carving lines down his face, his voice low. "If we can make it through Dry Gulch before nightfall," he muttered, "we'll be halfway to the forest trail." Lydia handed him a waterskin, her voice edged with doubt. "Is it safe?" Wyatt shot her a crooked grin, a flicker of confidence. "Nowhere is." They pushed on, but as the mouth of the gulch loomed, a narrow, blood-red canyon carved deep into ancient stone, Wyatt slowed. A shiver ran down his spine. Something was off. The birds had vanished, leaving an unnatural silence hanging in the air. No wind, no rustling brush, just the oppressive stillness. Then, out of that silence, came the crack of gunfire. Sharp, lightning fast. Wyatt's cry pierced the quiet as a bullet tore through his shoulder, blood blossoming across his shirt as he lurched backward, nearly falling from his saddle. His horse reared, shrieking in terror. "What?" Lydia's scream echoed as three shadowy figures emerged from the jagged rocks, two on a ledge, rifles leveled, one blocking the narrow trail ahead. Their faces were all too familiar. The scarred man who'd haunted her nightmares in the house grinned, a cruel twist of his lips. "Thought you could run, sweetheart?" Lydia's pulse hammered in her chest. Wyatt slumped sideways, barely clinging to consciousness. Without hesitation, she yanked his reins and kicked her horse into a frantic dash, veering sideways down a hidden cut in the canyon. Bullets hissed past like deadly whispers, one ripping through Lydia's sleeve, but she didn't falter. Her only thought was getting Wyatt out alive. Behind them, shouts and pounding hooves chased their fleeing shadows. She ducked behind a fallen log, pulling Wyatt's limp form into her arms. The narrow path twisted behind a wall of jagged stone, out of sight. She dismounted swiftly, her hands trembling as Wyatt's head lolled against her chest. "He's bleeding out," she whispered fiercely, dragging him behind a massive boulder. His face was ghostly pale, blood soaking his shirt like a dark stain. She pressed a cloth to the wound, her hand trembling as she fought to keep him conscious. "Stay with me," she ordered, voice rough. Wyatt blinked slowly, a faint flicker of life returning. "You ride like hell. You're not dying," she snapped, tearing open his shirt with trembling but determined fingers. "I wasn't planning to." His weak smile flickered, trying to soften the moment. They rode into the outskirts of Sage Hollow, just as dawn's first light bleeding over the rugged hills. A ghost town forgotten by time. A single cracked water tower leaned like a tired old sentinel, and a battered saloon with windows patched by torn newspaper stood silent amid the dust. But for Wyatt Reed, this forsaken patch of dirt was the last place that still whispered memories of who he once was. before the scars, before the loss, before the darkness took hold. He dismounted with deliberate slowness, every joint stiff from a gunshot wound that still throbbed like a living thing. Lydia steadied him, her dusty clothes and determined face a quiet testament to unyielding resolve. "We'll find him at the sheriff's office," Wyatt muttered, voice rough from days of hardship. Lydia nodded silently, her gaze steady. The building was a weathered wooden shack, its slats warped and creaking with every gust, a single barred window hinting at the secrets inside. The sign hanging crooked on the door, a star-shaped badge hanging half loose, seemed to tremble in the morning breeze. Inside, the air reeked of stale tobacco and worn leather, a scent that clung to the walls like memories of better days. Behind the desk sat a man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples and eyes sharp as a blade. He looked up as they entered. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, voice gravelly with surprise. Wyatt Reed crawling out of the dirt. Wyatt's lips curled into a faint smile, a ghost of the man he used to be. "Still breathing, Cal," he rasped. The marshal grinned, eyes flickering with a mixture of recognition and caution. Then he cast a quick glance at Lydia, eyebrows arching in silent question. Wyatt's voice dropped to a low, gritty whisper. "I need your help." The smile vanished from Marshal Calvin's face as he leaned forward, sensing the weight behind those words. They sat in tense silence, Wyatt spilling every detail. How he tracked her trail, the men who came after her, that scarred brute, the ambush that left him bleeding in the dirt. Lydia's voice was cold, steady, recounting what she'd seen, what she knew. The marshal listened without interruption, the silence stretching thick as the smoke of a dying campfire. When they finished, he leaned back slowly, exhaling like a man who'd been holding his breath for too long. "I've heard whispers," he said quietly, eyes shadowed. "Girls snatched from stagecoaches, miners vanishing into the night. Nothing concrete, no witnesses left alive. Just ghost stories and broken dreams." He looked straight at Lydia. "You're the first, and maybe the last, to come back with a story worth telling." Lydia met his gaze, fierce and unyielding. "Not if we stop them first," she said. Marshal Calvin nodded slowly, a glint of steel behind his eyes. "I've been waiting for the right moment. Waiting to catch those sons of gunmen red-handed. Let's give them a reason to run." That night, under a sky heavy with stars, they laid their trap. An abandoned freight warehouse on the town's edge, long since forsaken since the mine closed its doors. Wyatt and Lydia stood just outside, their horses tethered nearby, shadows cast long and ominous in the flickering lantern light. "Did you really think you could run forever?" His voice was a low, dangerous whisper in her ear, like a shadow creeping through the night. His battered frame struggled against her, elbowing her hard, forcing her to duck beneath his reach. But Wyatt Reed didn't hesitate. With a steady hand, he drew his pistol and fired, a single, deliberate shot that rang out like a thunderclap across the silent plains. The scarred man staggered back, clutching his side as crimson seeped through his fingers. From the shadows, another outlaw darted toward the loading door, desperation etched in every step. Without a second thought, Wyatt charged, tackling him head-on in a flurry of fists and dust. Two riders managed to break free, their horses pounding into the darkness, disappearing beyond the horizon. But it didn't matter anymore. The circle was shattered. The fight was dying out. The scarred man crumpled against the cracked adobe wall, blood pooling beneath him like a dark, sticky stain on the dirt. Lydia moved forward, slow and cautious, her eyes fixed on the fallen figure. He looked up, face pale and twisted with pain, lips cracked and trembling. "You're the last one," he rasped, voice barely more than a whisper. The final piece, the last prize. His hand twitched, reaching toward his belt as if to grab something deadly. Lydia took a step back, her breath catching. Wyatt's finger curled around the trigger once more. Without hesitation, he fired again. The body went still, the silence settling like a heavy fog over the wrecked saloon. Smoke drifted lazily through the shattered windows, mingling with the faint scent of gunpowder and burnt wood. A lone lantern swung on its hook, creaking in the breeze, casting flickering shadows. Lydia stared down at the man who had haunted her nightmares, at the ghost of her past finally laid to rest. But instead of triumph, a strange sense of relief washed over her, quiet and heavy. Wyatt limped over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. His voice was soft, but resolute. "It's over." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering with something new. Hope, perhaps, or the faint glow of freedom. Weeks slipped by like shadows in the dawn. The courtroom in Fort Rock was humble, yet it was bursting at the seams with faces eager for justice. The dust motes danced in beams of sunlight, and the judge's gavel echoed like distant thunder rolling over the hills. Lydia sat upright in the witness chair, her back straight, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her voice wavered at first, but her gaze stayed firm. She told her story, the sack, the bruises, the desperate escape. And when Wyatt Reed stepped forward, his voice low, steady, and unwavering, the room fell into a hushed silence. The truth was laid bare. The outlaw ring was exposed, their leader, the scarred man, silenced forever. Across 3 counties, arrests were made, justice finally catching up with the darkness that had haunted them all. It was slow, painstaking work, but it was done. After the verdict, the district marshal offered Wyatt a position back with the forest rangers, a chance to chase down shadows once more. But Wyatt shook his head. "I've had enough of chasing ghosts," he said quietly. "It's time I went home." And this time, he wouldn't be walking alone. You think you've seen the West at its wildest? Think again. Because the most powerful stories aren't born in gunfire or dust storms. They're whispered in the hush of a sunset, when 2 souls find their way back to each other amid the vast, unforgiving plains. The day was simple, a handful of friends gathered beneath a sky streaked with gold, the kind of quiet beauty only the frontier can paint. A fiddle, long buried in an old barn, sang out a tune that drifted through the air like a ghost from the past. Children, wild and carefree, tossed wildflowers into the breeze, their laughter mingling with the steady beat of old folks clapping in time. The hills shimmered in the dying light, glowing like silk spun from a dream. Lydia rode beside Wyatt on a sturdy bay mare, her dress light as the breeze, her smile brighter than the dawn. Blessings floated on the wind, but the only words that truly mattered were his. The promises he whispered as the sun sank behind the ridge. As shadows lengthened and the sky turned a deep, molten amber, Wyatt leaned close, his voice low and steady. "That first night when you called out from the sack, all I could hear was fear," he murmured, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "But now,